imagine the ground starts to shake beneath you. At first, it feels small, almost like a truck rolling by, but then it grows violent. So violent you can't even stand. And before you can process what's happening, you hear it, a roar from the ocean. Not like waves crashing, but like a freight train tearing straight at you. Then you see it, a wall of black water, towering 40 meters high, charging towards land at nearly 700 kilometers an hour. Cars tossed like toys, whole buildings ripped up and carried away like they never existed. Centuries-old communities wiped out in seconds. This wasn't some old myth or a Hollywood special effect. This was March 11th, 2011, the day a magnitude 9 earthquake unleashed one of the deadliest tsunamis in human history. Nearly 20,000 lives lost, over 1 million buildings gone, towns left as nothing but rubble. And in Rikuzen, Takata, a coastal city where 1,700 people perished, something unbelievable happened. Out of 70,000 pine trees that once lined the shore, one single tree survived. The locals called it the miracle pine, a lone symbol of defiance against nature's fury. But Japan didn't just mourn and rebuild with concrete walls. They came up with something no one expected, a living defense system, a 395-kilometer-long forest planted along their coast, one of the boldest environmental projects ever attempted. Today, we're diving into Japan's Great Forest Wall, a massive living barrier, and it's more than just trees in the ground. It's a bold experiment with one haunting question behind it. Can nature protect us from nature itself? March 11th, 2011 started like any ordinary Friday in northeastern Japan. Office workers were finishing their lunch, children were in afternoon classes, fishermen were preparing for the evening catch. Then, at 2:46 p.m., their world changed forever. The Tohoku earthquake was a monster, the most powerful ever recorded in Japan, and the fourth strongest globally since modern seismography began in 1900. About 130 kilometers off the coast, massive tectonic plates snapped and shifted, shoving an almost unimaginable volume of seawater into motion. The result? Tsunami waves as tall as 30 to 40 meters. These waves weren't just fast, they were ripping across the Pacific at the speed of a passenger jet. And the quake that created them, it unleashed as much energy as 600 million Hiroshima bombs. Try to wrap your head around that for a second. The water didn't just crash into the coast and stop. It clawed its way up to 10 kilometers inland, and the power didn't fade once it left Japan. The ocean literally carried pieces of the disaster across the world. Months later, debris was washing up on the shores of California and Oregon. Some of it kept arriving even years after. Japan's massive concrete defenses crumbled like sandcastles. The Kamaishi breakwater, an engineering marvel that stood 8 meters high and was considered one of the world's strongest tsunami barriers, was completely destroyed only 2 years after being built. Record-breaking concrete barriers that cost billions of yen simply disappeared under the black water, racing across rice fields and through city streets, carrying with it cars, boats, houses, and everything else in its path. In Osuchi town, population 16,000, the tsunami killed 803 people, including the mayor and town officials who stayed behind trying to coordinate evacuations. The town hall was completely destroyed. Entire families simply disappeared, their homes swept out to sea along with everything else they had ever owned. By 2015, 431 residents were still declared missing. In Rikuzen, Takata, the destruction was almost instant. Within minutes, 1,700 lives were gone. This wasn't just some small fishing village. It was a place with over 1,000 years of history, famous across Japan for the pine forest that lined its shore. 70,000 trees, a living landmark that sheltered generations of families who built their lives beneath them. And in a single afternoon, both the people and the forest that defined their identity for centuries were wiped away. Close to 500,000 people were forced to evacuate. Imagine 500,000 people suddenly homeless in a matter of hours. Over 130,000 rescue workers were dispatched from across Japan in what became the largest rescue operation in Japanese history. After the disaster, Japan was left with a brutal choice. Do what they'd always done, build even bigger, thicker concrete walls. And at first, that was exactly the plan. A massive 395-kilometer seawall project, unlike anything the world had ever seen. But then, something unexpected happened. As engineers and communities sifted through the wreckage, a different idea began to take root. A living alternative. Something that hadn't really been done before. What if Japan worked with nature itself rather than using steel and concrete to fight it? Enter Dr. Akira Miyawaki, a legendary botanist whose radical ideas would reshape Japan's approach to coastal defense. A man who would soon become known as the Forest Keeper. Walking through the tsunami-devastated coastline, Miyawaki made a crucial observation. The monoculture pine forest that had lined Japan's shores for generations had failed not just because of the tsunami's size, but because they were fundamentally artificial. These neat rows of identical trees, many of them non-native species, had shallow root systems and couldn't withstand extreme forces. The dense, multi-layered forest of native species, such as castanopsis trees, camellias, and evergreen oaks, with interconnected root systems that could literally hold the ground together, were what Miyawaki had in mind. These wouldn't just be pretty coastal decorations. They would be living tsunami barriers. His proposal was bold. Create a great wall of forest stretching 300 kilometers along Japan's hardest-hit coastline. The forests would be 100 meters wide and require approximately 90 million trees, more than any reforestation project in Japanese history. These wouldn't be ordinary trees, but dense, biodiverse ecosystems that could grow 10 times faster and 30 times thicker than conventional forests. But what if 90 million trees aren't enough? What if they're planting hope instead of protection? Well, the government listened. By 2015, Japan had officially embraced the forest approach. The initiative aimed to restore traditional tsunami prevention forests along the coast from Aomori Prefecture in the north down to Chiba Prefecture south of Tokyo, transforming the wreckage of disaster into the foundation for future protection. So, how was this done? And was it effective? Well, what happened next showcases Japanese ingenuity at its finest. The tsunami had left behind millions of tons of debris, shattered concrete, splintered wood, twisted metal. Most countries would have hauled this to landfills. Japan saw an opportunity, and the execution was technically complex but relatively simple. To build this living wall, workers had to start with the wreckage itself. They picked through the tsunami debris piece by piece, pulling out anything toxic, separating clean concrete, wood, and soil. What was left wasn't just dumped. It was stacked into massive embankments, 3 to 5 meters high, creating man-made hills along the coastline. Then came the real secret, covering those hills with a carefully engineered soil mix. Not just ordinary dirt, but a blend designed to help trees take root fast. The depth had to be exact, deep enough for roots to anchor, but not so heavy that it crushed the fragile structure underneath. Every layer mattered, because this would be the foundation for an entire forest. Then came the groundbreaking Miyawaki planting method. When it came time to plant, Japan didn't do it the usual way. No neat rows, no single species lined up like soldiers. Instead, volunteers packed the ground with life. 3 saplings crammed into every square meter. Different species, side by side, competing and cooperating the way real forests do in nature. That's what makes them strong, and that's what will make them last. Every layer had a purpose. Along the shore went salt-tolerant plants, shrubs and grasses like miscanthus and beech morning glory, able to take the first hit of wind and salt spray. Behind them rose the true barrier, broadleaf trees like Quercus glauca, Quercus salicina, camellias, and castanopsis. And further inland, deciduous trees waited like a second line of defense, ready to trap debris that might break through. It wasn't just engineering anymore. It became a movement. Entire communities came together, shovels in hand, planting not just trees, but hope. Massive planting festivals were organized across the devastated coastline, with thousands of volunteers participating in single events. In an effort to safeguard their future, children who had lost their homes planted trees. Native seeds were carefully chosen by elderly survivors who recalled the forests of their childhood. Local schools organized tree planting therapy events, recognizing that the act of planting was as much about emotional healing as environmental protection. Shinto priests blessed the new forests, connecting the project to Japan's ancient tradition of sacred grove protection around shrines. The renamed project, Jinju no Mori, or Guardian Forests, explicitly invoked this spiritual dimension. The scale had never been seen before. 90 million trees across 300 to 400 kilometers of coastline. To put this in perspective, if you lined up all the planned forest strips end to end, they would stretch over 3,000 kilometers, close to the distance from Madrid to Moscow. So, what were the results? The early outcomes have been nothing short of remarkable. Since their planting in 2012, the Miyawaki method woods have expanded at unheard of speeds. Trees that typically take 30 to 50 years to mature are reaching notable heights in as little as 5 to 7 years. Within 10 years, several experimental plots reached a height of 10 meters, confirming Miyawaki's assertion that his approach generates growth 10 times quicker than normal plantations. Within just 3 years, many forest plots no longer required weeding. The dense canopy had created its own microclimate that suppressed invasive species naturally. When disease or pests attacked one species, others filled the gaps. When storms damaged some trees, the diverse root systems maintained soil stability. The biodiversity recovery has been absurd. Birds, insects, and small mammals that had disappeared from coastal areas began returning to the new forests. Species that hadn't been seen in some areas for decades were suddenly thriving in the thick, multi-layered cover. Maybe the most important part? These forests are already showing signs of protection, at least against smaller threats. Coastal forests are nature's own defense system. They break waves, slow erosion, and hold shorelines in place. Simulations even show that the extra friction from trees can shrink storm surges by nearly a quarter. That's huge. Now, whether these new forests could stand up to another monster tsunami, that's still unknown. But the science is solid on one thing. Trees can take the punch of water, absorb its force, and redirect its energy. The community spent 150 million yen, roughly $1 million, to preserve the 250-year-old survivor with metal framework and special resins. Today, it stands 27 meters tall in a memorial park, lit up every night as a beacon that can be seen from across the rebuilt city. One of the most creative applications came up in Sendai, where city planners created the Millennium Hope Hills system. Instead of simple coastal forests, they built 15 parks featuring 10-meter-high artificial hills made entirely from tsunami debris and covered with native trees. These forested hills serve triple duty: tsunami evacuation sites, creative debris recycling, and recreational green space. The psychological impact has been equally important. Communities with growing forests report higher levels of optimism about the future and greater willingness to rebuild permanent infrastructure near the coast. Children who took part in planting festivals have become environmental advocates, understanding how human actions can either protect or endanger their communities. Also, tourism has provided an unexpected benefit. The combination of memorial sites like the Miracle Pine with growing coastal forests has attracted visitors interested in both remembering the disaster and witnessing Japan's innovative recovery approach. This disaster tourism generates revenue for rebuilt communities while spreading global awareness. However, as remarkable of an achievement all of this is, it hasn't come without controversies and concerns. As the forest project expanded, unexpected challenges and criticisms came up that threatened the entire vision. The most basic scientific question was whether trees could actually prevent a large-scale tsunami. A recurrence of the mega tsunami in 2011 may simply uproot new trees, making the barriers ineffective, according to computer models, even though forests would undoubtedly help with weaker waves and storm surges. The government even declined to replace seawalls entirely with forests in most areas, citing lack of evidence for protection against extreme events. Timing became a critical concern. Trees take decades to reach full maturity and maximum protective capability. But major tsunamis strike Japan's coast roughly every 500 to 1,000 years. What if the next catastrophic event happened before the forests were fully established? As we know, nature doesn't wait for human preparations to be complete. Environmental concerns also came up. Moving millions of tons of debris and soil raised contamination fears, particularly given radiation from the damaged Fukushima nuclear plant. Critics worried about creating monocultures that might support invasive species or prove vulnerable to disease outbreaks. Also, cultural tensions rose around the project's national branding. The original Great Forest Wall concept was eventually renamed Guardian Forest to better reflect local traditions. But some communities felt their specific needs were being overlooked in favor of grand national narratives. There were competing interests between national planners envisioning continuous forest barriers and local communities wanting to restore existing sacred groves. The economics became complicated as well. While tree planting relied heavily on volunteers and was relatively cheap to establish, long-term forest maintenance would require ongoing funding and community commitment. The broader coastal reconstruction program was costing hundreds of billions of yen, and some questioned whether forest investment was the most cost-effective protection strategy. Sea level rise may lead to more salt intrusion, which over time may harm forest root systems. Young trees could be repeatedly uprooted before they become fully established by stronger typhoons. Decades from now, shifting rain patterns may impact whether species may thrive in coastal environments. Maybe most troubling, some critics argued the forest might create a false sense of security that could encourage risky coastal development. If people believed trees would protect them, would they build homes and businesses in vulnerable areas that should probably stay evacuated? What if these forests create a dangerous illusion? What if the next tsunami is even bigger than 2011? What if this forest fails in the next quake? Will these communities pay the ultimate price for betting on trees over concrete? This was all homegrown fears and concerns. But what about how this devastating event, followed by its turnaround, rippled across the entire world? What have other countries learned from this? A global movement towards green infrastructure, using natural systems to offer services that were formerly provided by steel and concrete, is reflected in Japan's Coastal Forest Initiative. However, it stands out from other international initiatives due to its scope, particular goal, and creative technique to recycling waste. Japan's project isn't the only Great Wall of Trees out there. In northern China, they've been working on their own Great Green Wall since 1978. A 3,000-kilometer shelter belt meant to stop the Gobi Desert from swallowing more land. Over 30 million hectares of trees have gone into the ground, but survival rates are shaky, and a lot of experts question whether it's really slowing down desert expansion or dust storms at all. Africa has its own version too, the Great Green Wall of the Sahel. The idea? Restore 100 million hectares across 8,000 kilometers of dry, fragile land. Not just to fight desertification, but to spark jobs, lift communities out of poverty, and heal ecosystems all at once. On paper, it's breathtaking. In practice, progress has been painfully slow, tangled up in politics, money troubles, and the sheer difficulty of coordinating across so many countries. The Netherlands takes a different approach entirely, combining massive concrete barriers with natural floodplains and wetland restoration. Their Delta Work system protects millions of people living below sea level, but at enormous economic and environmental cost. The Dutch model prioritizes engineered solutions while incorporating natural systems where possible. Bangladesh has probably the most relevant comparison to Japan's tsunami forests. Huge mangrove forests provide cyclone and storm surge protection for millions of coastal residents. These natural barriers proved their worth during the devastating 1991 cyclone and 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, reducing casualties in protected areas compared to exposed coastlines. Far across the pond, since Hurricane Katrina showed how beneficial wetlands are for protection, the US has experimented with restoring coastal marshes and living shorelines. Louisiana is restoring coastal marshes that act as storm surge barriers, while Florida uses mangrove restoration and beach dune systems to protect against hurricanes. So, with all of that in mind, what makes Japan's project unique globally is its specific focus on tsunami protection, combined with the innovative use of disaster debris as forest foundation. No other country has attempted to transform the wreckage of a natural disaster into the infrastructure for preventing future disasters on this big of a scale. The project has already begun inspiring similar initiatives worldwide. Cities from Miami to Mumbai are experimenting with coastal reforestation and mangrove restoration. Although it's rarely used at the size Japan is aiming for, the Miyawaki approach has been adopted for urban forestry initiatives throughout Asia, Africa, and Europe. But as the world watches Japan's ambitious experiment unfold, one question echoes louder than all the others. When the next great wave comes, will these forests stand? Today, more than a decade after the 2011 tsunami, children who were born after that terrible March day are helping to plant and tend Japan's coastal forests. For them, the forests are part of the natural environment, places to play and learn and connect with the land. This generational change might be the project's most important legacy. By embedding forest care into this community culture, Japan is creating sustainable protection that doesn't depend on government programs or emergency funding. The forests become part of what it means to live on Japan's coast. The trees planted in 2012 are now approaching teenage maturity, reaching heights of 8 to 10 meters in the fastest growing areas. In another decade, they'll begin approaching the 20 to 30 meter heights that could provide significant tsunami protection. But the real test of Japan's Great Forest Experiment is still years away. The 2011 tsunami taught Japan that nature's fury can overwhelm any human defense. The seemingly invincible concrete barriers disintegrated like sand. In a matter of minutes, cities that endured a millennium of storms disappeared. However, a different type of wisdom rose from that destruction. The realization that real resilience may come from working with and comprehending natural systems, rather than from opposing them. Whether Japan's forest will stop the next great tsunami is still unknown. The ultimate test hasn't come, and hopefully won't for generations. However, they have already achieved something equally significant. They have provided communities with a means of converting devastation into defense, hopelessness into optimism, and human engineering into living systems that become more resilient over time. That may ultimately be the most important lesson to be learnt from Japan's coastal forests. Sometimes, roots that grow deeper with each season and bend with the wind are a better defense than a wall that stands firm against the storm. The miracle pine of Rikuzen Takata stands preserved in its memorial park, lit against the night sky, surrounded now by thousands of its younger companions growing toward the light. Whether those trees save lives in the next tsunami, or simply remind us that life persists in the face of catastrophe, they represent something essential about human resilience. The faith that tomorrow's seeds can also become tomorrow's shelter. From a coastline reduced to rubble, Japan chose to rebuild with nature. As we said, the question that remains is whether these forests are true protection or symbols of hope. In the quiet endurance of 90 million trees taking root along Japan's shattered coast, maybe the answer is that sometimes hope and protection are the same thing. What about 50 wild facts about Florida you never knew?